It was late evening, and the sun had almost disappeared behind the scrapyard walls. Ben, a lonely mechanic living on the edge of District 9, wiped grease off his hands and walked outside. The air was cold, the sky turning orange and purple, and he carried a small box of leftover food. Every night, he left his uneaten scraps behind the old storage crates, hoping some stray animal would find them. But that evening felt different. As he walked toward the crates, he heard a soft rustle, like someone moving quickly behind metal. Ben stopped, narrowed his eyes, and whispered, "Hello, anyone there?" There was no reply, just silence. Until he heard it again, this time a soft cough. He placed the food down and slowly stepped back, watching, waiting. Then, two small shapes peeked out from behind the crates, not animals, children. They were thin, dirty, and covered in torn blankets. One had soft green skin and glowing blue eyes. The other had violet skin with short white hair. Both looked scared, their faces tight with hunger and fear. The older one, maybe 10 years old, held the younger one close and said in a whisper, "Please, sir, can we have that?" Ben was silent for a moment, shocked but not angry. He slowly nodded, "Yeah, it's yours," and stepped back further so they wouldn't run. The kids dashed forward, grabbed the food, and began eating quickly. They didn't speak again, only ate like they hadn't had a real meal in days. Ben watched them with a heavy heart. They were just kids, and clearly not from Earth. Aliens, yes, but not dangerous, not violent, just lost. And starving. "Where are your parents?" Ben asked softly. The older one shook her head and looked away. "We're hiding," the younger one finally said, her voice tiny. Ben didn't ask more. He could see pain in their eyes. Instead, he walked back to his workshop and returned with 2 blankets. "Take these. It gets cold at night," he said, putting them on a wooden box nearby. The kids stared at him, unsure, but then the older one whispered, "Thank you." That night, Ben couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring into the dark. Why were alien children hiding behind his crates? Where did they come from? Were they in danger? High above the planet, far beyond the clouds, a massive ship hovered silently. Inside it, a dozen screens showed different angles of the city, scanning each street and corner. One screen zoomed in on the back of Ben's workshop. It showed 2 tiny figures under blankets and a human offering food. A voice from the shadows inside the ship said, "Found them." But down below, Ben had no idea. He made a simple bed inside his tool shed that night, soft cloth, water bottle, and another small plate of food. He left the shed door slightly open, just in case they returned, and they did. They came back, slowly, quietly, and slept curled together on the blanket Ben had left. The mechanic watched from his window, heart heavy but calm. He didn't know who they were, or why they were hiding, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't let them go hungry again. What he didn't know was that feeding them might change his entire life, because the galaxy's most powerful woman was watching, and she was coming. The next morning, Ben found himself walking quietly toward his tool shed, his steps muffled by the early morning dew on the grass. He opened the door slowly, the hinges groaning just a little, careful not to startle anyone who might be inside. And there they were, the 2 alien children still sleeping, curled together under the thick woolen blanket he had left for them. The smaller one, a boy he guessed, clutched a broken piece of scrap metal as if it were a cherished stuffed toy. The older one, the girl, had one eye cracked open, a sliver of shimmering gold watching his every move with a caution that went far beyond her years. Ben knelt down, his old knees popping in protest, and gently placed a wooden tray on the dusty floor. On it were simple offerings: thick slices of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a glass bottle filled with clean, cool water. "I brought breakfast," he whispered, his voice barely disturbing the silence. The older girl sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her small shoulders, her gaze still guarded, still unsure. "Why?" she asked, her voice a soft melodic hum that was distinctly not human. "Why are you helping us?" Ben offered a small, tired smile. It was a question with a long, complicated answer, but he gave her the simplest version of the truth. "Because someone helped me once too," he said. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press him for more. The unspoken understanding hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge built on shared hardship. From that day on, the tool shed became their secret sanctuary. It was a silent agreement. Each night, as dusk settled over the town, the children would return. And each morning, they would be gone before the first rays of sunrise painted the sky, disappearing like ghosts. But Ben noticed the small signs they left behind. They were signs of gratitude, of a life trying to find order amidst chaos. They would fold the blankets neatly, leaving them on the cot he'd set up. They'd use an old rag to wipe the floor clean of their footprints. And on his workbench, nestled between wrenches and gears, they would leave small, curious gifts. One day it was a shiny blue pebble that seemed to shimmer with an internal light. The next, a feather that glowed with a soft, pulsing luminescence in the dark. These were their thank yous, their currency. Still, they never told him their names. They were just the children from the stars, and he was the old man in the shed. One afternoon, Ben returned from the market earlier than usual, a bag of fresh vegetables in his hand. As he approached his workshop, he heard soft voices drifting from the shed, not the usual hums or clicks, but actual words spoken in a language he couldn't understand, yet the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of siblings, of family. Curiosity got the better of him. He crept to the side of the shed and peeked through a crack in the weathered wooden wall. Inside, the two children were huddled together, whispering. The younger one's voice was filled with a childish worry. "Do you think Mother is looking for us?" he asked. The older sister hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor for a moment, before she looked back at her brother with forced confidence. "She has to be," she said, her voice firm. "She's Empress Nyelera. She never gives up." Ben froze, his breath catching in his throat. Empress Nyelera? The name sent a jolt of ice through his veins. That name wasn't just known across the galaxy, it was feared. Ruler of the formidable Zareth Empire, conqueror of 20 star systems, a figure of myth and terror. Rumors spoke of her possessing weapons capable of shattering moons, of fleets that blotted out suns. And her children, her royal heirs, were hiding in his backyard, sleeping on a pile of old blankets. 1,000 frantic thoughts crashed through Ben's mind. What was he supposed to do? Call the Galactic Authority? But that would be a death sentence for them. Hide them? How could an old mechanic hide anyone from an empress with eyes everywhere? He looked down at his own hands, calloused, stained with grease, hands that were used to fixing broken-down speeder bikes and rusted droids, not protecting a royal bloodline from one of the most powerful beings in the universe. But then he thought of their faces, of the glowing feather, of the way the little one clutched that piece of metal. They trusted him. And in his quiet, lonely life, that trust felt more valuable than any galactic credit. That night, everything changed. The fragile peace of their secret world was shattered. Two figures, men dressed in sleek, dark suits that seemed to absorb the dim alley light, came walking down the path behind his workshop. They moved with an unnerving, predatory grace. They didn't knock. Instead, they began scanning the walls of his shed with handheld devices that emitted a low, electronic hum, and cast glowing green grids on the wood, searching for heat signatures for life that didn't belong. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs, but decades of keeping a low profile had taught him how to wear a mask of calm. He grabbed a bag of trash, opened his back door, and stepped out, feigning surprise. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. One of the men turned, a smile on his face that was all teeth and no warmth. It was a cold, cruel expression. "We're tracking a signal," the man said smoothly. "Something. Not of this world." Ben leaned against the doorframe, forcing a nonchalant shrug. "You won't find anything like that here," he replied, gesturing vaguely with the trash bag. "Just a pile of broken engines and a lifetime of rust." The man's eyes lingered on the shed for a moment too long, a glint of suspicion in them. They eventually moved on, continuing their sweep down the alley. But Ben knew they weren't gone for good. They were circling. As soon as they were out of sight, Ben rushed to the shed. That night, the lock on the door wasn't enough. He worked quickly, his hands surprisingly steady, bolting heavy metal bars across the inside of the door. He gave the children a pair of old, noise-canceling headphones he used for engine work. "Don't make a sound," he instructed, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "And don't come out. Not for any reason, until I open this door myself." The older girl looked at him, her golden eyes searching his. For a long moment, she just stared, as if weighing his soul. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice barely audible. "We're used to running. It's all we've ever known." Her words were heavy with a resignation that no child should ever feel. But Ben just shook his head, a fierce protective fire kindling in his chest. "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No child should have to run. Not here, not while I'm alive." High above the planet, shrouded in the cloaking field of an Imperial flagship, a royal guard named Zevra watched the scene unfold on a surveillance feed. She saw it all, the old human feeding the royal heirs, wrapping them in his own blankets, and now standing as alone, fragile shield between them and the Empress's hunters. She narrowed her eyes, studying the man's weathered face on the screen. "This human," she muttered to herself, a mix of confusion and grudging respect in her tone. "He doesn't even know who they are. And still, he guards them better than half our elite legion." Her orders were crystal clear: retrieve the royal heirs at any cost. Destroy all threats. Erase any witness who stood in the way. Her hand moved instinctively towards the console, her finger hovering over the button that would deploy an eradication squad. It would be over in minutes. The human would be gone, the evidence erased. But she stopped. Something about this man's simple, defiant kindness gave her pause. It was an anomaly, a variable she hadn't accounted for. He wasn't motivated by reward or power, but by something else, something she hadn't seen in a very long time. Zevra leaned back in her chair and with a decisive click, turned off the monitor, plunging the bridge into darkness. The orders were clear, but sometimes orders were wrong. "I'm going down myself," she announced to the empty room. This situation required a different approach. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part. Far above Earth, inside a silent royal command ship, Zevra stood at the edge of the viewing screen. She was not just any guard. She was the Huntress General of Empress Nyelera. Feared across star systems, she followed orders without question. Until now. On the screen, two small alien girls curled up in a tool shed, hidden behind a human's garage. And the human, just an old mechanic with worn boots and tired eyes, brought them food, water, war crown, no weapons. No reward. He gave, because he cared. Zevra's fingers hovered over the transmission pad. The Empress had ordered her to stay on the ship, but the children, her children, had survived the attack and escaped in damaged pods. Now they were on a primitive planet, under the care of a stranger. She couldn't wait any longer. Zevra shut off the feed, pulled on a black cloak, and stepped into the stealth shuttle. She left no signal, no report. Just a shadow falling from the stars. Ben worked late that night, fixing an old hover cart brought in by a farmer. His mind wasn't on the machine, it was in the shed with the kids. They had eaten quietly and slept faster now, less afraid. Still, they spoke little. He didn't even know their names. At midnight, he heard something. Not a voice, not a footstep. Just a feeling, like he was being watched. Ben stood, wiped his hands, and looked around the dark alley behind his workshop. There was nothing, no lights, no people. But he felt it again, a sharp breath on the back of his neck. He turned, no one. But Zevra was there, hidden in shadow, just beyond the edge of the roof. She watched him silently, how he moved, how he protected the shed like it was sacred. She had expected a fool or a threat, but this human was gentle. She leapt down quietly, landing on the rooftop of the shed without a sound. Inside, the two girls were fast asleep, hugging each other under the blankets. Zevra's hard face softened for a moment. She had trained for war, for blood, but seeing them breathe calmly brought tears to her eyes. Then she turned her gaze to Ben. What was his game? She slid off the roof and walked to the front door. Ben heard the knock light, but firm. He opened the door and saw a tall woman dressed in dark armor, her eyes silver like polished steel. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at him. "You are the one feeding the girls," she said. Ben tensed. "Who are you?" "I'm not here to harm them," she said quickly. "I'm here to bring them home." Ben didn't move. "Home? They're safe here." "You can't just take them." Zevra studied him. "You don't know who they are, do you?" Ben frowned. "They're not just any children," she said softly. "They are daughters of Empress Nyelera, the ruler of half the galaxy. Their blood is royal. Their names alone can change wars." Ben stepped back in shock. "Royalty? Here? Hiding in his tool shed?" "I don't care," Ben said finally. "They're just kids to me." Kids who were starving. Zevra's face changed. For years, she had fought in wars to protect the Empress's empire. She had seen people lie, cheat, and betray for power. But this man? He fed two strangers just because they were hungry. "I'll return soon," she whispered. And without another word, she vanished into the shadows again. But something in her heart had already changed. The night was cold, so cold the rain felt like tiny shards of ice tapping against the tin roof of Ben's shed. Inside, though, it was a different world. Two alien girls, refugees from a world he couldn't even imagine, slept side by side. They were warm, buried under a mountain of thick blankets he'd scrounged up from his own sparse collection. Before turning in for the night, Ben did his usual routine. He walked over to the shed door, his boots scuffing against the concrete floor, and jiggled the heavy iron lock. He checked it once, then twice. It was a habit now, a ritual to ensure their safety. But tonight, routine was broken. His pocket communicator buzzed, a frantic, high-pitched tone he knew all too well. It was his neighbor, Old Man Fitzwilliam, his voice crackling with panic. His cargo hauler's engine had given up, right in the middle of Sector 4. It was blocking traffic, and the city wardens were minutes away from impounding it. Fitzwilliam was practically begging. "Please, Ben, you're the only one who can fix it fast." Ben sighed. He couldn't just leave him hanging. He grabbed his worn-out, oil-stained coat, glanced back at the two sleeping figures, and bolted out into the rain. In his haste, in his rush to help a friend, he made a tiny, critical mistake. He forgot the final, crucial part of his ritual. The latch. He'd pulled the door shut, but he hadn't secured the heavy bolt. It was just resting in place. As the downpour intensified, the wind began to howl, weaving through the narrow alleyways like a hungry beast. A particularly vicious gust slammed against the side of the shed, rattling the whole structure. The unlatched door shuddered, then creaked, and finally it swung open. Just a crack, but it was enough. Inside, the older of the two sisters, Alara, jolted awake. The sudden noise, the rush of cold, damp air, it sent a spike of alarm through her. She sat up, her senses on high alert, scanning the darkness. Through the gap in the door, she saw nothing but the rain-slicked alley and the distant, blurry glow of the city's neon lights. No immediate danger. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized she was alone in the nest of blankets. The younger one, Lyra, was gone. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Then she saw her. A small silhouette, crawling on hands and knees toward the open door. "Wait," Alara whispered, her voice a strained hiss. "Where are you going?" Lyra paused, turning her head. Her large, curious eyes reflected the distant city lights. "I just want to see," she whispered back, her voice full of a child's innocent wonder. "We've been in here for so long. We haven't seen anything but these four walls." Alara understood the feeling, the suffocating confinement. but the fear was stronger. "It's not safe," she pleaded. But it was too late. Before Alara could scramble out of the blankets to stop her, Lyra had slipped through the crack in the door and vanished into the stormy night. 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Ben finally returned, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead. Fitzwilliam's hauler was purring again, but the relief Ben felt was short-lived. The moment he turned the corner into his alley, his stomach plummeted. The shed door. It was ajar, swinging gently in the wind. A cold dread, colder than the rain, washed over him. He didn't walk, he ran. He burst into the shed, his eyes wild. The blankets were in a heap on the floor. One small body was missing. Alara sat on the cot, her face pale, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror and guilt. "I told her not to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. She wanted to see the lights." She didn't listen. Ben's mind went blank with panic. There was no time for questions, no time for blame. He grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight he kept by the door, its beam cutting a sharp cone through the darkness, and plunged back out into the night. He sprinted down the alley, shouting. But what could he shout? He didn't even know her name. He just yelled, "Hey, little one, where are you?" His voice was swallowed by the storm. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Lyra stood mesmerized. She'd wandered, drawn like a moth to the brightest light she could find, the corner convenience store. She was standing in front of a large glass window, a world of impossible wonders displayed within. It was a chaotic rainbow of stuffed animals and soft, cuddly toys. There were fluffy bears, smiling octopuses, and star-shaped pillows. She had never seen anything so delightful, so gentle. She pressed her small three-fingered hand against the cold glass, her breath fogging the small circle on the pane. Her eyes were wide with a wonder that had been suppressed for far too long. Suddenly, the store's door flew open with a clang of a bell. A grumpy-looking old man with a permanent scowl etched on his face stepped out. He pointed a crooked finger at her. "Hey, you, what are you doing? You don't belong here. Go on, get away." His voice was like gravel, harsh and accusatory. Lyra flinched and stumbled backward, her moment of wonder shattered. The world turned cold and hostile again. Just as tears began to well in her eyes, a figure skidded around the corner, breathless and drenched. It was Ben. He took in the scene in a split second, the tiny, terrified girl, shrinking away from the angry shopkeeper. Instinct took over. Without a moment's hesitation, Ben stepped directly between them, shielding her with his body. "She's with me," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a handful of worn credit chips. He counted out enough to buy 3 of the most expensive toys in the window and slapped them into the old man's hand. "Let her pick one. Anything she wants." The shopkeeper scoffed, muttered something under his breath about street kids, but he took the credits and shuffled back inside his store. Lyra looked up at Ben, her large, dark eyes swimming with confusion, guilt, and a dawning sense of relief. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Ben's tense shoulders relaxed. He knelt, getting down on her level, the wet concrete soaking through the knee of his pants. He gently wiped the rain and tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "You're not trouble," he said, his voice soft. "You're just a kid who wanted to feel like a kid for a minute. There's nothing wrong with that." In that moment, something shifted. Lyra didn't hesitate. She threw her little arms around his neck and hugged him tight. For the first time since they'd crash-landed on this strange, loud planet, she didn't feel like a refugee. She didn't feel like a fugitive, she just felt safe. High above the rain-swept streets, perched silently on a rooftop across from the store, a figure watched the entire scene unfold. Zevra, captain of the Imperial Royal Guard, observed through her visor's magnification. She saw the human, the simple mechanic, place himself between the child and the aggressor. She saw the protective stance, the lack of fear, the immediate defiance in her defense. Zevra had seen it all. She'd seen decorated soldiers flee from a skirmish. She'd seen powerful nobles sacrifice their own people to save face. But this was different. This ordinary man, with nothing to gain, was guarding a lost alien child as if she were his own. He offered his own meager resources not out of duty, but out of simple kindness, a feeling she hadn't encountered in a very, very long time. Zevra raised her arm, her fingers tapping a sequence on her wrist-mounted comm unit. A quiet chime, then a secure channel opened. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice low and steady. "I've found them. The princesses are safe. But there's a complication. There is something here you need to see for yourself." Back in the relative quiet of the shed, the storm outside began to subside. The two sisters were huddled together again under a single warm blanket. Lyra was fast asleep, clutching a brand new bright yellow stuffed starfish Ben had bought for her. A small, peaceful smile was on her face. But Alara, the older sister, was wide awake. She watched Ben as he quietly dried his tools, putting his workshop back in order. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why do you care so much? We're not your people. We're not from here." Ben paused his work, turning to look at her. He didn't need to think about the answer. It was simple. "You're just kids," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You're scared, and you're alone. You don't need to be from around here for me to care about that." A comfortable silence settled between them, more comforting than any words could have been. And outside, beyond the veil of the clouds, something massive and silent blotted out the stars. A royal starship, sleek and dark, descended through the atmosphere, its cloaking technology rendering it invisible to the world below. The Empress was on her way. And this time, she wasn't sending soldiers. She was coming herself. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more. It was early morning when Ben heard the knock. It wasn't the usual loud banging from delivery men, nor the neighbor's familiar three-tap pattern. This knock was quiet, but sharp, like someone who had never knocked before, only commanded. Ben wiped his hands on his jeans and opened the door slowly, just a crack. Standing in front of him was a tall woman in a long black cloak. Her skin was a startling silver gray, and the armor beneath her cloak shimmered like liquid metal in the faint morning light. And her eyes, they were cold, glowing, and sharp, like two moons staring directly into his soul. Behind her, the street was empty. No guards, no weapons, no soldiers. She had come alone. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice low but firm, carrying an authority that seemed to bend the air around her. Ben didn't step aside. He was just a simple mechanic, but he wasn't easily intimidated. He kept his body blocking the doorway. "Who are you?" he asked, his own voice steady. The woman reached up and removed her hood slowly. Her face was regal, strong, and etched with a kind of distant power, but there was something incredibly tired behind her eyes, a weariness that didn't match her imposing figure. She looked past Ben, her gaze fixed on the old shed behind his house. "My name is Nyelera," she said softly, but the name hit Ben like a bolt of thunder. Nyelera, the Empress. The iron-fisted ruler of half the galaxy. The one whose name made even hardened generals bow in fear. And she was standing on his rickety porch, looking like a ghost in high-tech armor. "I'm not here to take them by force," she said, her eyes still locked on the shed. "But I will see them." Ben's protective instincts flared. He stepped forward slightly, making his stance even more resolute. "They're asleep. And they're safe. You should know that they told me about you." A shadow of pain crossed Nyelera's face, and her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. "I lost them," she whispered, and for the first time, her voice shook with raw emotion. "There was an explosion at the palace, an assassination attempt. I thought they were dead." Ben's own resolve softened just a fraction. He remembered finding them. They were starving, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Cold, hiding behind storage crates in a forgotten cargo bay. And no one came for them. Nyelera looked away, unable to meet his gaze. A flicker of shame crossed her regal features. I searched entire systems, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and despair. I burned planets to find them. I interrogated traitors and allies alike, but no one told me they were here, on this forgotten world. Ben said nothing, letting the weight of her words hang in the air between them. You found them, she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. You fed them, protected them. You risked your life for two strangers. He shrugged, a simple, honest gesture. I didn't know who they were, Ben replied. I just saw two kids who needed help. Nyelera looked up at him again, and her silver eyes were filled with something he never would have expected from an empress shame. You were more human than most of my empire, she said, the admission costing her dearly. Finally, Ben stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in, he said, but be gentle. Don't scare them. He led her through his small, cluttered home and out the back door to the shed he'd converted into a makeshift bedroom. The old wooden door creaked open as Nyelera stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of hay and machine oil. She knelt down quietly beside a pile of warm blankets on the floor. As the soft light from the open door touched them, the two girls stirred, blinking in the sudden brightness. The younger one, barely 7, sat up first. Her eyes went wide, filled with disbelief and a dawning, incredible hope. Mom? She whispered, the single word cutting through the silence. The older one, maybe 10, froze completely, her body stiff with shock, but her lips trembled, betraying the storm of emotions inside her. Nyelera didn't speak. She couldn't. She just opened her arms, and for the first time since she'd arrived, tears of pure, unadulterated relief rolled down her silver cheeks, tracing paths of light on her face. In an instant, both girls leapt into her embrace like lightning breaking the sky. The Empress held them close, crushing them to her armored chest. In that moment, there was no crown, no throne, no galactic empire, just a mother who had finally, against all odds, found her lost children. Outside, Ben stood by the shed door, watching silently. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He just waited, giving them the space they deserved. After a long, emotional moment, Nyelera stood, holding her daughter's hands tightly, as if afraid they might vanish again. She looked at Ben, her eyes still wet but now filled with a profound gratitude. I came here expecting to punish someone for hiding royal blood, she said, her voice clear and steady once more. But instead, I found someone who reminded me what honor really is. She stepped closer, her imposing height softened by her gentle expression. I owe you a debt greater than any crown can repay. Name your price. A planet? A fleet? A title? Ben just raised his eyebrows. He looked at the two girls, who were now peeking out from behind their mother, their faces streaked with tears, but their eyes shining. I don't want gold or ships, he said simply. Just let them smile again. Nyelera nodded, and for the first time in years, a genuine warm smile graced her lips. Far above the earth, her flagship, a colossal vessel of shimmering black metal, shimmered in the clouds, waiting for a command. But Nyelera didn't order an attack. She didn't issue a threat or a demand. She opened a channel to her first officer, her voice filled with a newfound peace. Prepare the royal quarters, she commanded. My daughters are coming home. And then, after a brief pause, she added one more thing, her tone leaving no room for argument. The human is to be protected. At all costs, on the ground. Ben watched as a beam of light enveloped the Empress and her children, pulling them up into the sky. He just smiled, wiped his hands on his jeans again, and went back inside to make some coffee. It was, after all, still early morning. The sky over District 9 was clear at sunrise, a peaceful blue canvas promising another ordinary day. But by noon, the promise was broken. The sky turned red. This wasn't the gentle, romantic red of a sunset, nor the warm, comforting glow of dusk. No, this was a fierce, unsettling crimson, deep and pulsating. Like a fire was trapped behind the clouds, desperate to break free. People stopped in their tracks. Cars slowed. The familiar rhythm of the city faltered as everyone looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and a creeping dread. What was happening? Hovering silently above the city was the source of their fear, a colossal royal starship. Its surface was a smooth, obsidian black, adorned with intricate golden symbols that seemed to writhe in the eerie red light. It was a sight of terrifying beauty. From its belly, smaller ships began to descend, like a shower of falling stars, streaking toward the earth with silent, deadly speed. Then, the city's defense systems roared to life. Alarms blared, their frantic wails echoing off the skyscrapers. Defense drones buzzed through the air, their metallic shells glinting red. A synthesized voice boomed from unseen speakers, ordering everyone to seek shelter immediately. Go inside. Lock your doors. Stay away from windows. Panic began to ripple through the streets as people scrambled for safety. But one man didn't move. Ben stood outside his grimy workshop, arms crossed over his chest, his gaze fixed on the impossible sight in the sky. He looked like a man who had already lost everything, so what was one more disaster? Behind him, huddled in the doorway, were two small figures, the alien girls he had taken in. They gripped each other tightly, their large dark eyes wide with a terror that was all too familiar to them. They knew what this meant. She's really bringing the fleet, the older one, Alara, whispered, her voice barely audible over the sirens. The little one, Lyra, trembled beside her. Are they here to take us away? She asked, her voice shaking with unshed tears. Ben turned, the hard lines on his face softening as he looked at them. He knelt down, bringing himself to their level. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. And I'll stand right here until I know you're okay. That's a promise. His words were a small shield against the chaos erupting around them. High above, inside the royal command ship, Empress Nyelera sat on her throne. The command chamber was a symphony of polished metal and holographic displays, but the atmosphere was tense. Her advisors, clad in formal military attire, pleaded with her. Your Majesty, we must follow protocol, one urged. Secure the children, eliminate the local witness, and erase this planet's memory of our presence. It is the only way to ensure their safety and the Empire's secrecy. They spoke of tactics and strategy, of acceptable losses and galactic law. But Nyelera wasn't listening to them. She was listening to her heart. She raised a single elegant hand, and a profound silence fell over the chamber. Silence, she commanded, her voice calm but carrying an authority that no one dared to question. I will go alone. Her advisors exchanged stunned looks. Alone, Your Majesty? It's too dangerous, but her decision was made. One by one, the smaller ships that had been descending toward the city halted their advance. They pulled back, retreating into the crimson sky, where they floated like distant, shadowy sentinels behind the clouds. Only one vessel continued its journey, a small, sleek royal cruiser, which glided gracefully toward Ben's workshop. The cruiser landed with barely a whisper in the narrow, junk-filled alley behind the tool shed. A ramp lowered, and from the shadows of the ship stepped Empress Nyelera. She was not dressed in the intimidating armor of a ruler, but in flowing silver robes that shimmered in the ambient red light. She moved with an innate grace, a queen walking through a world not her own. As she made her way down the street, curious and fearful faces peeked from behind drawn curtains and cracked doorways. But Nyelera paid them no mind. Her eyes, the same dark eyes as her daughter's, were locked on one place, the dented metal door of Ben's workshop. Ben opened it before she could knock, as if he'd been expecting her. Behind his solid frame, the two children peeked out, their small faces a mixture of fear and hope. Nyelera stepped inside, and the sudden silence in the room was heavier than the blaring sirens outside. She took a moment to look around. The air smelled of oil and metal. Tools hung from dusty pegboards, rusty machines stood silent in the corners, and old oil stains marked the concrete floor like ancient maps. It was nothing like the pristine gilded halls of her palace. It was not a place of power or wealth, but it was safe. And at that moment, she realized safety meant more than all the gold in her empire. She finally turned her gentle gaze to her daughters. "I've come to ask you both something," she said, her voice soft, stripped of all imperial command. "Do you wish to come home with me or stay here?" Ilara, the older girl, looked completely surprised. She had expected to be captured, to be scolded, to be dragged back to a life of royal duty. "You're giving us a choice?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Nyalera nodded, a sad, loving smile touching her lips. "I am your mother," she said. "Not your jailer." The younger girl, Lyra, looked from her mother to the rugged man who had given them pancakes and fixed their broken toys. "If we go, will we see him again?" she asked, looking up at Ben. Ben smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his tired eyes. He knelt beside her again. "I'll always be here," he promised. "Always. This door is always open for you. You're welcome anytime." Hearing this, the two girls turned to their mother. In a rush of emotion, they hugged her tight, burying their faces in her silver robes. "We want to go home," Ilara whispered, "but only if we can visit." Tears welled in Nyalera's eyes, the first she had shed in years. She held them close, feeling the warmth of their small bodies, a feeling she had missed more than she could ever express. "Then that's what we'll do," she whispered back. Releasing them, she turned to Ben, her expression one of profound gratitude. "You've done what no warrior, no royal guard, no entire empire could do," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You protected my heart, my two little hearts, and you didn't even know it." Ben just gave a small self-deprecating chuckle. "I just saw two kids who looked like they needed breakfast," he said simply. As the royal cruiser lifted off, with the two girls waving frantically from the viewport, people slowly emerged back into the streets. They gathered in small groups, pointing at the ascending ship. Some clapped, some just stared, their minds struggling to process whether what they had just witnessed was real. High above, the menacing red glow in the sky began to fade, softening into a gentle, hopeful gold, like the dawn of a new day. Later that evening, back at the workshop, Ben sat on the flat roof, sipping lukewarm coffee from an old tin cup. The city was quiet now, returning to its normal rhythm. He looked up at the stars, now visible in the clear night sky, and wondered if somewhere out there, among those countless points of light, those two little girls were looking back at him. For the first time in more years than he could count, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't pride. It wasn't fear or relief. It was just peace. A quiet, simple peace. And for a man who thought he had nothing, it felt like everything. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more. Weeks passed, and District 9 almost returned to normal. People still whispered about the day the sky turned red, about the massive ship hanging above the clouds, and the royal woman who stepped out of it like a ghost from a legend. But for Ben, life was quiet again. He spent his days fixing old hoverbikes, unclogging water pumps, and helping neighbors who still had no idea about his secret. He never told anyone about the children or the Empress. He just smiled and remembered. Each night, he'd look up at the stars. He didn't know which one was their home, but he always looked anyway. Then one evening, just as Ben was closing his shop, a soft humming sound filled the sky. He looked up and saw a familiar shape, sleek, silver, and glowing. A royal shuttle. It landed gently behind his workshop, just like before, but this time, the door opened with laughter. Two small figures ran out first, squealing with joy. "Ben! The girls jumped into his arms, hugging him tight. He couldn't believe how much they had changed. Clean clothes, healthy skin, and eyes full of light. "You got taller," he joked, wiping his hands on his overalls. "You got older," the younger one said with a grin. Behind them, Naylora stepped down from the shuttle. This time she wore no crown, no armor, just a soft robe and a small smile. "You didn't think we'd forget you," she said, her voice warm. Ben scratched the back of his neck. "I figured royalty has more important places to be." Naylora stepped closer. "Not more important, just different." She handed Ben a small cool metal cube. He looked at it, completely confused. "It's a travel pass," she explained. "One that grants you full access to the royal planets. No restrictions, no scans, no questions." Ben blinked, speechless. "Why me?" he finally managed to ask. Naylora looked him straight in the eyes. "You cared when no one else did. You helped without knowing who they were. You protected my daughters when I could not." Ben stared down at the cube in his hand. He had never left Earth, never even left District 9, but something in his heart stirred. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't pride. It was hope. Would I need to wear a suit or speak in weird codes? He asked, a small nervous smile on his face. The girls giggled. "No," the older one said, taking his hand. "You just have to be you." Later that night, the neighbors looked up and saw something strange. A streak of silver light rising straight into the stars, and standing at the edge of it, a man in old boots, carrying a dusty bag and waving from the open door. Ben didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was part of something bigger. Not because of blood, not because of power, but because he gave kindness when it was needed most. On a faraway royal world, two girls ran through gardens of glowing flowers and halls of polished gold. But they still talked about grease stains, broken tools, and the warm bread Ben made in a busted old toaster. And every week, a shuttle flew back to Earth, quietly, secretly landing behind an old workshop where the stars had once come looking for mercy, and found a mechanic with a heart too big for one planet. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from across the universe. I'll see you in the next one.